for the Stoughton Area Resource Team, often known as the START program. I also serve on the Stoughton Cares Coalition, and we welcome you this evening. I'm going to be the reader of your questions, and Sharon, my partner here, is going to be keeping track of time so that we can respectively get out of here before it's too late in the evening. So Sharon is up next.
My name is Sharon Mason-Boersma, and thank you, all of you, for coming tonight. We have tonight school board candidates for April, and we also have city council candidates for April. And this event is sponsored by Stoughton Cares, which is a drug and alcohol prevention coalition representing Stoughton. And Cindy and I are both members of Stoughton Cares, and we work on different kind of policies, environmental work, and public information like tonight regarding drug and alcohol prevention for underage youth. And first of all, Steve Jackson, who is an incumbent running for school board, could not be here tonight, but he did send me his answers to the questions. We have 5 questions for tonight for our candidates. He did send his answers to me, and after all of you are done, I will read the answer for each question that we cover tonight. So we have 3 minutes on each answer, and since I'm the timekeeper, I made a little sign, and so that you folks would know you have 1 more minute before we go to the next person. So what I did when we set this up, I set the candidates for city council, the first 4, and then the 2 candidates tonight that are present running for school board. And so we'll start from the right to the left. And Cindy will start with question number 1 with Mr. Jensen.
Okay, thank you, Sharon. Today we hear often about the impact of the opioid heroin epidemic nationwide and locally. What can be done locally to slow down and stop this epidemic? What about juuling, e-cigarettes, and underage drinking?
Yeah, you would start with me on this one, wouldn't you?
Yes.
It's a very, very difficult question. I know that our being chair of the Public Safety Committee, that our police are working very hard to try and do what they can. I know they have Narcan on hand, and they have saved a few lives using that. So I think that they're doing everything they can with the limited resources that we have. As far as the last part of the question here, e-cigarettes and underage drinking, we run, for lack of a better word, a sting every couple of times a year, where we will send a underage person in with their legitimate ID and test whether the businesses in town are complying with the laws. So that's something that we're very up to date on. And as far as the cigarettes or the e-cigarettes and juuling, boy, I don't know. I just really don't have an opinion on that right now. I would like to see it go away, but I mean, other than that, as far as what we can do about it, I honestly don't know. Not without something coming down from federal or state level.
Thank you.
So opioid heroin epidemic, that's obviously a big issue. I think we need to approach it from a public health standpoint. I'm an advocate for a national single payer system. And I think that a lot of people who get on these drugs for whatever reason, they get addicted, and the withdrawal symptoms are what keeps them on the drug. They just want to feel well, and how they feel well is they get another dose. I think that solutions like methadone, where it doesn't give the high but it relieves the withdrawal symptoms, those are underutilized in favor of some cases total abstinence programs, where the symptoms of the withdrawal get to be so intense. And as far as juuling and e-cigarettes, I think the companies that have been allowed to create these, bubblegum flavors, the ban has gone through on those, but apparently there's loopholes where people have these disposable ones, and it's really tough, but really cracking down on the companies marketing to kids, because that's what they do, whether they say it or not, is important. Locally, that's hard to do. And underage drinking, I think, is it's a cultural problem we need to approach through the community. The sting operations, making sure no one is serving in public is one thing, but what people do in their own home is another matter.
Having worked in healthcare for a number of years, I think that I think a little bit more about prevention, because I've seen how difficult it is when kids and adults end up addicted. I know that there has been a push in the medical community to rely a lot less. So there's something called Joint Commission that actually you were penalized if you let patients be in pain for very long. So a lot of doctors, it was very easy to start them on opioids. So that has since backed off, and I have seen, certainly at Stoughton Hospital and where I was working at Mercy, they have done a much better job of referring patients for physical therapy, some alternative things like meditation and yoga and those sorts of relaxation sorts of things. So I've seen some success in that. So I would much rather focus on if we can, the prevention side of things, because it's a whole lot easier. The one thing that we have done locally, pretty recently, I think it started in the Public Safety Committee, was to bring the vaping laws in so that they match the smoking laws. So now you cannot vape in public and you can't purchase it. I think it's 18, right? That's the age for
21.
whatever age you can. Okay, so now it's 21. So those match, so that helps get it out of the hands of kids, hopefully. At least that's the goal. And in terms of, again, from the underage drinking, I always look again at, as much as we can do to prevent. I think support networks, as much as we can encourage those, like what many of you are doing in the community, after school programs, that's what I'd like to really encourage and see continue. So.
Hello. I would say first on juuling and e-cigarettes, I agree that the 21-year-old limit for the use of them should be continued. I don't think that they should be made illegal for adults. I think that once you're the age of consent, you make your own decisions. But if it's being used, for instance, by a smoker to get off of cigarettes so he doesn't ruin his lungs, it's still unattractive, but it's better than what he had been doing. Underage drinking, definitely continue with the programs like DARE and the other drug programs where we're trying to let everyone know that we're against young people doing those sorts of things. On the opioids, I think that opioid use and heroin use are symptomatic behaviors. That is, they're suffering after they start taking these substances in a way that keeps the person who discards them and doesn't stay hooked on them. The people who continue are self-medicating. So what we need are more mental health services, better family support, probably better job programs so that people who are struggling in their personal life to support the household and turn to some sort of addictive substance can find help. I'm not at all against the networking and the support of civic groups. I also think that faith-based involvement is not a bad thing at all. It's a place where people can get support and find relief from what might be tormenting them. So I guess if we want to look at young people, the highest rates of depression ever recorded in young people, I think it's due to too much social media, and I think if we can help them network and find other activities, we'll probably find out that their rate of addiction goes down. Thank you.
I think a couple things we have to first of all understand, primarily with illegal narcotics, with the opioid crisis, is here in Stoughton, we are somewhat vulnerable. We're very close to I-94. I-94 is lots of drug trafficking goes through there, through Chicago up to Minneapolis, and so that creates some certain vulnerabilities related to this. And as long as there's a demand, there's going to be supplies. There are really a few things that I think we need to do. It starts with education, and making sure that the programs that we are supporting, such as DARE, are getting the results we're looking for. I've been in education for 22 years. I now work for the Department of Corrections. I work with inmates that are dealing with this every day. And we have to make sure that if we're going to invest in these programs, that they're working. I think the second thing we need to do from an educational standpoint is we have to do much more what's called universal screening. And what that means is when we have to be identifying the students that are most at risk of becoming addicted to opioids and are falling into challenges related to alcohol and vaping and things like that. So we have to try to identify who those students are and try to ensure that they don't fall into the traps that they might. I think we don't do enough of that. And I think that we talk a good game about education, but we really have to identify individual students and students on an individual level related to that. Obviously, we have to have treatment programs and strong treatment programs through our health services and things like that. And then I think finally, I've heard about sting operations and things like that. We have to make sure our law enforcement has the resources that they need. And I think we really have to spend more time going after the folks, and I'm quite frankly, as humbling as it might be and as disturbing as it might be, we have individuals in this community who deal narcotics. And we have to find out who those people are, and we have to go after them. And spend much less time punishing the users, although that might be necessary, and spend more of our resources going after those. I think one thing that I've seen working in the Department of Corrections is we now have a lot of communities that are hiring what are called criminal intelligence officers or analysts, and they're specifically working at collecting intelligence on issues like this and providing law enforcement with the information they need to actually be effective in going after those that are peddling these things.
Hello. So first I'd like to agree with you in terms of I think we really need to place our resources into prevention because it's much easier to prevent this problem than to address it after it's gotten hold. As far as what Tim says about identifying the at-risk populations, we already have the research, the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, the ACE study. That's a study that was the largest study regarding trauma and youth. And we know that children who have an ACE score of 4 or more are much more likely to engage in risky behaviors of all sorts, whether it's drug or alcohol use or promiscuous sexual activity, all kinds of risky behaviors. And that's a pretty easy way to screen. The Adverse Childhood Experiences Study gives a questionnaire that's readily available. And in terms of practicality and how do we address this issue before it becomes a problem, and specifically when we're talking about youth, it was mentioned alternative programs such as mindfulness and yoga, but there's plenty of research to suggest that mindfulness has an impact on not only preventing drug and alcohol use in youth, but mitigating the damage and helping children and youth move out of addictive behaviors. I just have this study here from 2019 from the University of Southern California that said the study found that just 8 weeks of mindfulness training led to drops in stress and cravings and improved chances of staying clean even 6 months later. So there is a wealth of research to suggest that mindfulness programs, especially implemented at the school level and implemented early, and not only implemented with the children, but also implemented with teachers who are often dealing with vicarious trauma, or something that's sometimes called compassion fatigue syndrome. Traumatized teachers are less connected to the students in their classrooms, and these mindfulness studies in terms of how it relates to trauma or how it relates to addictive behaviors found that classrooms where students felt welcome and safe those children were at lesser risk of addictive behaviors, falling prey to addictive behaviors, and also higher educational achievement outcomes.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to read Steve Jackson's response to question number 1. At the simplest level, parents need to be more involved, keep meds out of easy reach, dispose of meds properly, but most important, talk with your kids on a regular basis about the dangers of these drugs, as well as smoking, e-cigs, and drinking. Local groups could bring in former addicts to have discussions with youth as an example of what can happen. My brother was a drug addict. We know that these drugs are in our community. Law enforcement should link together to share information which can lead to greater influence on how these drugs get here and how to keep them out. At the school level, perhaps we should consider how we discipline students who are in possession of contraband or are engaged in drinking, particularly if the student is involved in extracurriculars. Specifically, no more coach's discretion, quote unquote, when a kid gets caught. I understand that we want to keep students in school if they get caught, but it seems like consequences are relaxed, like in-school suspension or agreeing to a behavior contract. Perhaps adding some community service would be helpful. So now we'll go on to question number 2.
Legalizing personal and recreational use of marijuana has been introduced in our legislature in the recent past and to date has not been passed. Would you be in support of legalization of personal recreational use of marijuana? Why or why not?
Mr. Jensen.
Back to me. Thank you. Short answer, no. I don't think so, not yet. I don't think we know enough. I know that there are pluses and minuses to it, there are financial benefits, but then are the financial benefits outweighed by, the negatives? I don't know. If they're talking about medicinal, yes, I would be definitely in favor of that, because I do believe that there is some medicinal value to it. But right now, with the information that I have, I'd say no.
Thank you.
I'm going to say yes. Number one, it's objectively less deadly than alcohol, which we regulate and manage for better or worse. Obviously, don't drive under the influence, but people do not overdose on marijuana. They don't have deadly effects from withdrawal, and it does not form a chemical dependency. And you have to look at there are obviously adverse effects, but you have to look at those in the context of the adverse effects of prohibition. The actual reason that the Nixon administration scheduled marijuana as it did, his domestic policy guy, Ehrlichman, who was convicted under Watergate, but later in an interview he admitted that they specifically did this to go after Nixon's political enemies. He identified black people and the anti-war left. And we've seen in the enforcement of this a consistent targeting of minorities, especially black people. And I don't think that's just. I think the Illinois law that recently passed legalization, regulation, and the expungement of unjust previous sentences is the way to go. And we also have to look at the fact that it's become immensely popular as a policy. 2/3 of Americans are now for legalization. We've seen in several states that that there have not been these massive adverse effects in these years of legalization. I think there should be more studies into its health effects, but really the prohibition is much bigger harm than it is a good right now.
Thank you.
I would say I'm not there yet. I would agree with Ben that I do think people of color are targeted at much higher, disproportionate numbers. I think if it were legal, it would absolutely clean up the supply of, the marijuana that's out and on the streets. My concern at this point is I don't think there's a reliable way to measure impairment at this point. And I know I've tossed this around with Chief Fleck, and I know, having family in Colorado, there have been some issues, in enforcement and concerns about impairment and impaired driving, impaired skiing, which sounds, might sound sort of comical on the, in a sort of flippant way, but there have been some pretty significant accidents on the slopes with people who are impaired and injuring other people. So I think if I had a better comfort level of, how can we measure if somebody's impaired, and I know if that person in the next car is impaired and they're stopped, that they could, be arrested, but I think we're not quite there yet. So I'd like more science about how do we make sure that people are using or not abusing and they're not, putting other people at risk. So.
I would say yes, because I look at the 100-year-old battle of alcohol and prohibition. It managed to make a segment of the society who were willing to engage in illegal activity very wealthy and very powerful and also very violent. So when you restrict a commodity, you make it more valuable. If it's more valuable, it's worth committing crimes to keep control of it. So I think that any time you make a drug illegal or a substance illegal, you probably increase the chance of people being willing to fight for control of the territory. I always find it a bit ironic that we want to arrest people and put them in prison to save them from destruction. I don't know how putting a person in a prison ever made a person's life better. So I would say that because of that, I would have to say I think it's probably more destructive to the general youthful body of people. I mean, it's usually young people, I think. Older people are too crafty, maybe, or they know where to get it. But young people are who want to use it are probably using it. So if you made it legal, there might be a spike, but I think it would go back to the level of use that is probably present about now. The war on drugs has pretty much been super expensive. The enforcement of laws, the cost of incarceration, you add all that up, and I think you could put together a pretty nice program to rehab people if they accidentally did get into use that they couldn't get out of. So I guess because of that and the fact that if you did make the supply controlled, you would make sure it was safe, and you also could get tax revenue off of it. You add everything together, I would say I think it's time we made it legal.
Thank you.
So yeah, my answer is yes. I think what's interesting is a couple things. First of all, marijuana gets put into the same category as cocaine, heroin, and we know research-wise that it is far less dangerous. I think one of the things that's interesting is that marijuana is very common to be used to treat folks with opioid addictions. Anybody that has an opioid addiction will say that they regularly use marijuana to help them overcome that. So I think it's interesting that we're talking about opioids, and this is the next question. One of the things that I heard folks say is that we don't really have enough research, or we don't know enough, and part of the challenge is that we don't, because this is an illegal narcotic right now, and we can't do the research with focus groups that we need to do to determine what the long-term effects of this are. So by legalizing it, we could gather research that could ensure that this is something that is made more safe. And I think the other thing that, and again, working in the Department of Corrections, that I see is that there are now some very dangerous synthetic marijuana substances that are used that are much more dangerous. And so I think legalizing it in a way that's controlling it, legalizing it in a way that's ensuring that it meets certain FDA regulations, and so and those that sell it, need to pass need to get the proper licensing and can't have a criminal record and things like that. And so there needs to be some tight regulation. I think it goes without saying that the legalization of marijuana is going to generate tax dollars, and those tax dollars can be used to improve a variety of things. It's going to create jobs. And this is speaking as a gentleman that is very anti-drug. And this has been an issue that, I've thought about a lot over the years. And I think the other thing that I've learned is that this has been accused of being a gateway drug. And perhaps it is, perhaps it isn't. Coffee is a gateway drug. Alcohol is a gateway drug. The idea of addiction is folks looking for that greater high. And so I think that there's been lots of arguments and there's been lots of things that have been said that, that I would counter, and that I would say that as this has evolved, we have to really look at that. And so, like I said, I say yes cautiously. That might sound like a politician's answer, and wanting to take both sides of this, but I would support it as long as we have the right mechanisms in place to ensure that it's controlled and regulated in a way that's safe.
Thank you.
I'm also for the legalization of recreational marijuana. I won't go too long because everybody else on the panel said a lot of the things that I agree with. It disproportionately affects minorities. It's a step in the right direction to mitigate some of the effects of racially driven traumas that youth face. We can clean up the supply, as people said. It leads to better regulation, the tax revenue, the better funding for research. And I'm going to circle it back to mindfulness, which you may discover is a common theme here tonight for me, but addiction is at its root disconnection. And so if we can increase the connectivity in our schools, which I really believe that schools are at the forefront of dealing with social change. Teachers are the first responders when it comes to traumatized children who grow up to be traumatized adults who are more susceptible to addictive behaviors, violence, all types of negative outcomes. So, considering how we can address this from a school's perspective, I think it's time to stop punishing the user again. And many kids need support other than legal action, I think, when they find themselves in a situation with marijuana or other drugs or alcohol.
Thank you. Steve Jackson's response to this question. I have family and friends who regularly use marijuana to assist in managing their day-to-day activities for reasons that include mental wellness, anxiety, stress, as well as medical reasons. So while this may seem to fall into the realm of medical marijuana, there is something to be said about the benefits of being a functioning human being in our current society. If marijuana helps, then I would support its legalization and regulation.
Question number 3. How can we make housing more affordable and transportation more accessible in Stoughton while raising the number of millennials and families moving into our community?
Mr. Jensen.
Thank you. This is one near and dear to my heart. Affordable housing is something that we definitely need to work on. A truly affordable housing. Right now, I think the median price in Stoughton here is somewhere around $250,000, $280,000. That's just way too much for most people. I know I couldn't afford it. So what I propose to do is with the reorganization in April, I would like to see the council set up an ad hoc committee where we work with tradesmen, where we work with contractors, and we try and work out a way to truly come up with an affordable house for millennials, for people that want to come to the community. I think it can be done. I think there's ways that we can do it. The other portion of the question here is for bringing the millennials to the community. The riverfront project is something that needs to be completed. That, I think, will bring people in. Making sure that we have that vibrant downtown, that also will help to bring the community together, to bring people to the community, because that's one of the major draws is the Opera House and our unique downtown. So the affordable housing is definitely something that we need to work on.
Thank you.
Well, I think that our housing system is rotten from to its core. We have the commodification of housing where a lot of middle-class people consider their home their retirement fund. And investors are, rich investors from elsewhere, from Wall Street, they have been buying up homes, driving the price up. People who have a home, I don't blame them for, being happy at their property value going up. But people looking for a home, it's very, very difficult. We're also at the point in material and labor costs where new construction is, you cannot do affordable new construction without some sort of a subsidy. I think the real solutions have to come from HUD on down, housing and urban development, because that's where the money flows from, and the money is a trickle. We haven't been able to build new public housing without tearing down public housing for decades now. And I think I agree that the riverfront is something we can do in the meantime to not only have younger people move into the community, but also I think make Stoughton a more attractive option for a public transit, a bus line down here, to have that denser core in the downtown.
Thank you.
I agree with what a lot of both Greg and Ben have said. It's a conversation we've had many times on council, and it's not a Stoughton problem. It's a Dane County problem. It's actually a problem that's throughout the country. But Dane County has a lot of high-paying jobs, and people are coming out, and certainly not every job, but there are a number of people who are in the science field and the technology that are coming out of college making $60,000 to $80,000. Madison and Dane County is a very attractive place to live, so that increases the price. The number of climate catastrophes we have had has taken a toll on the trades and the resources and the cost of materials. We need to be realistic about those conversations that continues to cost money, and it also affects the availability of contractors and the materials. But I do think that this is a national conversation and one that we need to be pushing Dane County, starting with Dane County, and through our municipal group, and then funneling back to HUD, because it's a problem that Stoughton alone cannot solve. I mean, the mayor has worked with, we have had some conversations on council, but I know the mayor has met with some of the folks at Habitat, and they're looking at, I think, 6 properties. And that's, but that's just a small fraction of what we need to do. So I think it's a conversation that we need to be having at the state and county level, not just here in Stoughton. And in terms of the Millennials, I also think that the downtown riverfront is very much a step in the right direction, so I won't repeat all that.
Thank you.
I spent 30 years in the trades, so I'm fairly familiar with the environment around building. We lost a significant number of contractors back in 2007, 8, 9, 10, when the economy turned down. A lot of young men were released, and a lot of the older fellas who would have worked in the office went back out into the field and worked. They're all retiring. I think it would be a good idea to try to reinvigorate technical school and high school training of the trades so we could cheapen the cost of labor when we wanted to build a house. The other thing is, if you're a builder, the only reason you're doing it is to make money. So if we can help builders make money by building in Stoughton, then we have the answer there. And I don't know if the terminology or the programming that we would put it into, but I'm sure there are ways that we could help builders choose to build smaller, first-time homeowner type homes. Not every home is the last home you're going to live in. You should start out in a smaller home and move up, kind of like a work career. Start at a low wage, learn something, and earn more as you progress. I'm not really in favor of the public housing as much as private. I would like to see people who are in the business of building homes build the homes. I guess other than that, I think that one other thing that you could do would be allow a builder greater density. If he's building small homes on small lots, he can make a smaller piece of land pay better. So if we wanted to help do that, the city could allow the density to be increased and a builder would be able to make more money. Oh, I was going to add also, when it came to transportation, I think it would be a good idea that we try to put in a bus loop from Madison through McFarland, Stoughton, Oregon, and try to have at least a morning and evening route where this would maybe be younger millennials who really don't want to own a car, would give them an opportunity to find a ride up to Madison where their high-paying job is. Thank you.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I'm on the school board. I'm running for school board again. So in some cases, this feels a little bit out of my wheelhouse. However, it is something that impacts our schools, and it's negatively impacting our schools right now. The lack of housing. Our enrollment is declined. It's declining, and we have some very difficult decisions to make in the next couple of years as a school board related to as a manifestation of that. But there are things that can be done, and I think we have to start doing them. There are things such as affordable housing trusts. There are things related to relaxing zoning and developing some different rules around that, providing incentives, tax incentives to developers, funds via bonds. One that's near and dear to my house, my heart is more neighborhood revitalization. I'll be real critical right now. We just learned that we live in an old house. We just learned that we're going to have to pay $12,000 because of a sewage thing that the city's requiring us to change. And we had the same situation in Madison, and we only had to pay half of that because the city picked up half of that. And that's, we have to take care of our citizens, and we can't, I can't imagine saying to somebody, come and buy this old house, and in 5 years you're going to have to come up with $12,000 because of this. And so we have to take care of the people that are already here, and I think that that's one way to do it. And so I don't know, I hear what I hear what folks are saying about that Dane County needs to do stuff, HUD needs to do stuff. But I don't know that we can continue to wait. And I think we have to look at some innovative options here. And we have to make some moves. And as I've researched this, there are things you can do. There are things we can do. But I think the issue is do we have the political will to do them? And I think that's the question we have to ask ourselves. Because there are things we can do. And they may not be stuff everybody wants to do. But are we willing to do them? Are we willing to take the risks and the chances and the bold moves to do them? And I'm speaking as a parent of 2 children that are going to go through our schools. And I'm very concerned that they won't have some of the resources that I had in the 1980s in their schools or in their community because of this situation. And so this is something that I am very passionate about, and I really would like to see us make some moves one way or the other. I think it feels like we've been talking about this for a long time, and I just don't see anything happening. And so one way or the other, I think we have to start making some moves.
So I'm an educator with 20 years experience, and Tim stole my line. This is a bit out of my wheelhouse as well. But I've been the director of education at a nonprofit in Madison for the last 7 years, and what I can speak to what millennials and young families are looking for in a school district, and they're looking for progressive educational policies, and they're looking for things like project-based learning, radical ideas like delayed start times, homework policies more aligned with research, social emotional learning initiatives. So as far as affordable housing, I've heard a lot of great ideas here that are exciting, and I'm planning to do my research on those, and I'm glad that we've got people here who are speaking to that. But I think you draw people in with a progressive school district, and as Tim said, we've got a lot of hard decisions to make in terms of how we are how welcoming we are to families that want to try out the Stoughton School District or stay in the Stoughton School District. And that's really where I'm putting my attention and focus, is how do we increase the progressive educational opportunities in this town to draw people in and keep them here, and give them a voice in their educational experience. And just as the last bit, I love the idea of a bus between Madison and Stoughton, because my family was a one-car family for a while, and we were, kind of stymied by the inability to get back and forth between the two cities. And I think if that was an option, especially with these younger generations who are not so dependent on cars and who are more willing to rely on public transportation for lots of different reasons, I think that's a really great idea and something that we should talk about investing in.
Thank you. Mr. Jackson's response. Well, finally, an easy question. All kidding aside, there is no simple answer. Our community has to be supportive and empathetic to the needs of all people, and our leaders have to have a vision that makes affordable housing and transportation available. The recent study, which the school district supported, however, demonstrates that many in the community don't want things to change, but it's inevitable that more housing will be needed, and better transportation as well as other services should be expected. We should be looking at housing models and plans from around the country that have proven to work. I lived in Columbia, Maryland, a planned community with housing that ranged from affordable entry-level to expensive suburban-type homes, all connected by paths, recreational amenities, and small village centers for shopping. It works. An example I recently learned of is community cooperative housing, which is affordable housing run by a nonprofit. Whatever housing options we end up pursuing, the most important thing is to welcome folks to the community and give them a place to put their roots down. As for transportation options, we should be working with Dane County leaders and agree to join a regional transportation authority, formerly known as Regional Transit Authority. We should honor the value of having transportation options for our community and be willing to help pay for it through taxes.
Question number 4. What is your knowledge on homelessness in Stoughton, and how can we better support this population?
Mr. Jensen.
I must admit that my knowledge of this is limited, and so I would say that I'll dedicate myself to learning more about this. So that's one thing. But I think it has to go back to 2 things, and that's the housing issue that we've already talked about, and the other thing is having jobs that pay a living wage. So we would need to make sure that we set up the playing field to make it inviting to companies to come here to invest in this community and provide those kind of jobs. But I need to look at that more. I must admit, I'm not that knowledgeable about it.
Okay. Well, my wife is a special ed teacher in the school district, and she works closely with some of the most vulnerable families in the district. And I can tell you it's here. So when people hear the word homelessness, they think someone's sleeping out on the street. That doesn't often happen in communities as small as ours, but the invisible form of homelessness is pervasive in this country. It is people who get evicted, they stay with a friend for a while, they stay in a motel for a while, they bounce to another friend, and you overstay your welcome. You aren't able to scrape together enough for a deposit for a new lease. That's the form of homelessness we're dealing with, and again, it's back to housing supply and housing affordability. I think housing should be a human right, and we have a long way to go to get there in this country.
I would say most of what I know about homelessness is through the healthcare system. When people similar sorts of things don't have a permanent address or don't have a particular phone number, it's a sister or a brother or an aunt or whomever they can stay with. But I would say probably the best information I have is when I speak with colleagues from the school system, because I think, as someone said earlier, I think the school system is, I give people who work in the school system a lot of credit because they're responsible for more than just educating. They have to deal with a child who comes hungry. I don't need to tell any of you that. But I know that the group that had gotten together for the school and council to collaborate didn't go well. I think there was sort of a lacking of mission and or at least a plan, and I would really, really like to see that resurrected, because I do think that we could learn a lot from what is going on in the schools, and I think we can help support our families and our school folks that are, kind of down in the trenches. So I would really like to see that resurrected with a clear mission and people who are really interested in being a part of that. But I also really enjoy when we have people come to council and communicate with us about what's going on, because sometimes we're focused on our agenda and that next thing and that next project. And that's how we all learn about the needs of the community, is when folks come in and spend those, at the beginning of the meeting and give us a presentation. And I really look forward to that. So I'd like to continue to do that so we can, support what's available in the community and see what we need to do to perhaps be a better advocate for those services.
I'm not terribly familiar with homelessness in Stoughton, but I think that if it were similar to most other places, you would find three groups of people who find themselves most often homeless. The young and uneducated, those who have not had the opportunity to gain skills so that they're not able to really get the type of job that gives them sufficient income to pay the required rent. And then, of course, there are those who are suffering from mental health issues, and there's also addiction. So if you're looking to resolve it, you could look to, like, our new effort in Stoughton here, the HATS program, where they build some units and they try to move people in, get them established, and then they start to try to give them these other services. But another issue, and I think that Ben is right on the number with that, is its supply. If you don't have low-income places because every place is high-priced, because there's not enough homes, then there's no way that the less educated, the less well-equipped can afford to get into a place. So again, it's find a way to build some more homes so that people leave the less expensive to take a new home, leaving the less expensive properties for those who have smaller incomes. So if you're able to expand the housing, you're able to find a place for more of the people who have a lesser income, and that'll keep them from being homeless. I happen to have read about Governor Newsom in California, where their homeless problem is significant. He admitted it recently, maybe admitted isn't the right word, he acknowledged that they had prohibited building for too long. They'd made it too restrictive for too long. So they had to build some homes. You have to start building some homes. And he said one of the things that they would do would be supply government land to offer places where people could at least reside or set up a camp until they could find a home. And he was also taking the drastic move of saying he'd even waive some of the rules and regulations for building in order to do that. So mental health help, help people with their addictions, help young people and the unattached find better education, find better jobs, and make housing available. And I think you'd find that homelessness would be reduced.
Yeah, I mean, I as many as some of you might know, I served as a principal in a inner city school for 4 years, and this was a problem that I saw a lot and had to deal with directly and indirectly. I think here in Stoughton, and this was said very eloquently, you know, the homeless situation here is, you know, I would say it's more in the shadows, and most of our homeless population are folks that have been evicted, have whether that eviction came here in Stoughton or Madison, and they're living with friends or families, and they're just they don't have a consistent place to live. And in many cases, and quite frankly, probably the majority of the cases, there are children, students, and there are students that, because of our compulsory attendance laws, have to go to school. And so this problem really does affect our schools. And I think because of that, it also gives our schools the opportunity to do a lot about it. So a few things, obviously, the housing is important and all that. I think from a school-based standpoint, it's continuing to improve what is referred to as our multi-tiered systems of support. And that's, you know, ensuring that our kids in a variety of ways are having their basic human needs met, whether that's, you know, food, shelter, things like that. And I think we do a pretty good job in this district, actually. I've been very impressed with what we're doing and what our social workers do and special education teachers and other teachers are doing related to that. But it's continuing to strengthen those. I think what's also important along these lines is, as a school board, you know, we're focusing on and talking a lot about, and our administrators and teachers are closing achievement gaps. And I think we have to always remember that if we're going to close achievement gaps, we have to make sure that we are addressing the basic needs of our students. And I'm all for closing gaps and improving our test scores. I'm all for that. That's not going to happen if we don't provide our students with the social emotional resources they need as early as possible through universal screening and identifying those kids, as we've talked about earlier, as related to the opioid and other situations like that. But we have to make sure that we are very conscientious of that. And I'm gonna share this. It's been a very enlightening experience going from working in public education to working in the Department of Corrections. In the Department of Corrections, we have inmates that come and they're universally screened when they come, and their social emotional needs, their other needs are met even before they would come to me as a GED instructor. And I can't help but think if we did more of that in our public schools for these vulnerable populations, we might not have the pipeline we currently have into our Department of Corrections. And so this is obviously something that I'm very passionate about, because I think that there are things we can do. I think it behooves us as a district to continue to work on this and work with the city. But I think as schools, schools see this a lot, and they're really directly affected by it. And so I think the more we can do, the better.
Mm-hmm. I taught for many years in a Title I district in Phoenix, Arizona, so we dealt with a highly transient population, highly traumatized population, and that shadow homelessness aspect that's been mentioned. It's families, too many people in one home, which adds to stress, which adds to trauma. It's kind of a domino effect. From an educator's perspective, what people are speaking about here is Maslow's hierarchy of needs, in which the very most basic need is shelter, food, and safety. And until that need is met, you can't move up the pyramid, which ends in self-actualization. And so, from an educator's perspective, it's absolutely crucial that we allocate resources, like Tim said, to support our social workers and our special education teachers and our screening processes. I absolutely agree that universal screening would make a huge impact on our ability to allocate resources effectively and prioritize where we're going to put the funding. I just saw something on social media that Governor Evers people are hoping that Governor Evers will use this surplus to fund more mental health professionals in schools, and I cannot underscore how that would have affected my experience as an educator, to have more access to mental health professionals to support kids. And also, I think it's time we get more creative about how schools interact with other community resources like the food bank and those types of resources that are already in place to meet those absolute basic needs for children, so that we can increase their achievement levels and stop that prison to pipeline chain that we keep hearing about that's very real.
Thank you. And Mr. Jackson, his response to question number 4. Despite what you may hear, our modern day version of capitalism does not work for everyone. Homelessness does exist in Stoughton. I am aware of 5 to 10 families each year who are homeless, whose students attend our schools. They are part of the approximately 30% of our student population who are categorized as economically disadvantaged. School district staff do a great job of working with students and families to help identify available services. We have a very caring and giving community with many outreach and support programs, but these groups do not appear to be linked very well. We have 3 food pantries. Why not have one to make it easy for folks? Why not have one central agency for community services? I have heard from several folks who, in addition to needing these services, also need transportation, but have to travel back and forth to various locations to get what they need. They can't without reliable transportation. In addition to the housing and transportation discussion from question 3, I'd like to see Stoughton and the immediate surrounding towns join together and develop a services transportation support plan and fully fund it.
And now we're moving on to the last question, number 5. If you are elected, what are you hoping to accomplish during your term, and what do you want the voters to know about you?
Mr. Jensen.
Thank you. As I stated before, I think it's important that we create an ad hoc committee that would look at the affordable housing and see what we can do as a city to try and help with that. We also need to complete the riverfront project, make sure that goes forward. Like I said, one of the things that was mentioned before was about the type of housing that would go in there. Higher density, I think, is what they were talking about. I think they were looking at 300 units in that area. We'll have to see if that will work out or not. But anyways, we need to get that done. I would also want to. I wanted to say that we would like to complete or continue the effort that the mayor has spearheaded regarding transparency and openness for the community, with the community. And I know the council is also on board with that. So those are a few of the things that I'd like to make sure that we get done.
Thank you.
So since I was appointed to the council last year, I've been really trying to drive home that environmental policy should be a priority, and we have been taking steps on that. My daughter was born about a year ago as well. I consider it a personal responsibility to her to make sure she has a livable planet to grow up in, and that is regrettably a heavy lift on every level of our society. So on the Community Affairs Council policy, I hope to continue working there, which we've appointed as the task force for environmental policy. We're looking at aggressive renewable energy targets, which thankfully we have a public utility, which makes that a little bit easier. And circling back to housing, I think we have to look at our land use as well. The suburban pattern of development it necessitates car culture, which is it's a big issue. Some places are looking at being more flexible about single-family zoning. Minneapolis just allowed triplexes on any single-family lot, and we're not as dense as Minneapolis, but that sort of solution, although it goes against the principles of not in my backyard, which are sacred to some people, it allows for more affordable construction, more modest-sized homes. I think that's something to look at. Something Tim mentioned as well is there are community land trusts. There's one in Madison where families buy the house but rent, buy a lifetime. It's a lifetime lease on the land. So you're paying the cost of the house. It's not as much of an investment thing. The value doesn't go up as much, but it makes it more affordable to get into a home that your family owns. That's another thing we can look at as well.
I would say that I'm very much a long-range planner, and collaboration is really important to me. I do have a lot of concerns about our declining school enrollment. I want to make sure that our schools are sound and that our community grows. I visited Keganza, and I was told I was the first council person that had ever been there, and I felt a little bit ashamed that it took me that long to get there, but I learned a lot, and I feel like I have a lot more to learn from my colleagues who are in the school system. So I really think that we need to look at collaboration, and I don't mean just the school and the council, but I think there's some really smart business and community folks here who should be involved. And I'd like to ask them why some of their kids are not enrolled in the schools. I don't think anything that we do here is going to be simple as in a vacuum. I think there's a whole lot of reasons why we may have declining school enrollment, we may have housing issues, but I do think it's going to take more than just the council and the school board getting together. I think we need to invite business and community leaders. I think what's happening in the downtown redevelopment subcommittee is really exciting. I applaud them for taking the initiative to kind of launch that, because there's been some, really great ideas and community input that's come out of that. So I would say that bringing young people to the community and making sure that we thrive and the city survives for long term is very much a priority. But I'm also not just for growth that's not environmentally sound. I applaud Ben and that committee for putting together that resolution, because I think every decision we make can have a long-term impact on our kids and our community. So we need to be really careful and smart about how we develop, but I do think we need to grow and to make sure that this is a place where people want to bring their kids to school and the parks and recreation, so we can have a sort of a full-service community and none of us concentrate too much on one thing.
I'm in agreement with that. I think that we're faced with an opportunity right now with the river development. We have the residential portion, we have Mant Park's new plan, I guess you could call it. It's going to be a few years before it's implemented. The conversation around the whitewater rafting project all fit together in the small little neighborhood. If we get that done correctly, it'll be a 50-year piece of the community. If we get it wrong, it'll still be a 50-year piece of the community. So I'm very interested in seeing how that goes. I'm also interested in growth because about 10 years ago I was on the school board and we identified at that time that we need people. We keep losing people. What we need are homes, houses. The other thing I would really like to see, there was an ad hoc committee, I think, between the city council and the school district for a while. And unfortunately, I think that came to an end. I'd like to see that reinvigorated. We're working on that. That's good. I think that's a very good idea. One thing that I think unwarranted advice for the school board, an online program would be helpful because I know for each of the last 15 years we lose about 30 students a year to online programs in Monroe, McFarland, and Appleton. So if we held on to those 30 students every year and you multiply that by $12,000, we'd be in a much better spot on that. The other thing I want is the growth, I think would be helpful in keeping down our tax burden. I don't want any of our senior citizens retiring at age 65 and then 15 years later when one partner is gone and the remaining partner has a giant tax bill compared to when they first retired, suddenly being forced out of their home. It really would disappoint me if our city couldn't keep its tax rate down while growing and building additional infrastructure to support that growth. One thing we almost did a few years ago that I'd like to see looked at again was, and this would lend itself to getting millennials to be interested in staying here, and that would be a water park on the north side of town. We were very close to having that, but it would be the sort of local recreation that would make a young family more interested in our community. So get the riverfront development done right, get the school district a bunch of youngsters, get the housing so that the people can come here and bring their families, and do that all with keeping the taxes down, and the growth would support infrastructure growth. Thank you.
I want to start by answering. So this would be my second term. 3 years ago, just over 3 years ago, when I decided to run, I didn't really know what I was getting myself into, and I learned in a hurry. And so I kind of want to start out by saying, sort of, because it's a tough question to answer, what do I want to see? Because I think this is a we question. There's only so much one person can do within on a council or on a board. I think, you know, some of the stuff that I've seen happen in the last 3 years has been very impressive based on where we were. We have a significantly improved teacher compensation plan that I think the work that's been done on that has been remarkable, and I don't take any credit for it, but we've seen that happen. We have I think a more cohesive and better idea of how we're going to govern ourselves and our governance structure as a board. And I'm really excited about the linkages initiative that we have going. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. And so, you know, for me, what I'm hoping to do is build off of those successes and leverage those. I'm very excited about the linkages initiative in which we as board members are connecting regularly with various community organizations, school organizations, the city. And it's an ongoing thing, and it's not, it's a collaborative effort, and it's evolving, and I'm involved more with youth sports, which is something I'm very committed to, but it's really neat to see. And I think to just sort of kind of back up a little bit, I think one of the things that's been really impressive as a board, school board, that I don't think existed, quite frankly, before, is that I don't think we could have ever done something like that 3 years ago. There was a lack of trust on the board, and that's gone. We as a board certainly agree to disagree, but we can disagree without being disagreeable, and I think that's one of the strengths we have. And so I think we have a great opportunity here. And so for me, expanding that linkages and continuing to build that, continuing to work on improving the compensation plan, even though there's been great work done related to that. So I think we have to have a long-range plan. We've created a strategic plan, some strategic priorities. Now we have to decide how does that look, how does that play out over time. I think that's something that we want to do in conjunction with the city. And obviously the enrollment thing, and so for me, I think it's continuing to improve our programs and to find ways that we can distinguish our schools and our district in a way that's going to want families to come here. And I think we have a lot of great things going on here, and so what we need to add to those. And so, what I want to accomplish, I think, is more along the lines of building on our current successes and in such a way that that over time will make us a district that doesn't meet standards but sets the standard.
Thank you.
So I'm running for my first term at the school board, and I am coming from a long education background myself. I've taught at all levels, all the way from preschool all the way through university. I come with a really strong passion for trauma-informed learning, trauma-informed teaching resources to help teachers deal with the vicarious trauma and compassion fatigue syndrome that I addressed earlier. If elected, I plan to prioritize teacher wellness initiatives because the research is clear that teacher wellness is the single biggest indicator of student achievement. And I agree that achievement is important, but so is wellness. And so I plan to center those conversations about what is wellness, what is holistic wellness for our schools, because I think that's what families are looking for. I agree that I think Stoughton, I'm very excited by the current board, and I'm really excited to get involved in policy creation and implementation that supports these ideas and these practices that don't just center on test scores, but center on people's social emotional wellness, their executive functioning development, the connection between resources in the community, and take a more holistic approach to what it means to be a successful learner. I think that will draw lots of new energy, lots of new families. I think that creating a school where people want to be there, where students want to be there, where teachers are excited to come, is exactly the kind of focus that we need to have to address the enrollment issues. And I think that investing in progressive educational policies, getting more information, I hope to center conversations about restorative justice versus consequences, and certainly prioritize conversations about how to increase equity and bring more diverse voices to the table. And I just generally bring a passion for education in general and supporting teachers, because I think that teacher wellness is where we're going to get the most bang for our buck.
Thank you. Mr. Jackson on number 5. I was first elected to the Stoughton Area School District Board of Education in 2017. I am running for my second term. I want to maintain the consistency in board governance and operations that has taken place over the past 2 years. We have done some really good work through strong leadership and board member involvement. I am focused on raising district performance and expectations, supporting educators and staff, and providing strong academic programs for all students. I will continue to support social and emotional programs to ensure our kids are prepared to learn every day. I am ready to put in the work to analyze the district's long-term planning needs and how best to manage our resources in light of declining enrollment. I understand fiscal challenges that lie ahead and am willing to challenge assumptions, ask the tough questions, and work together to provide solutions that best support our students, staff, and the community. And then he thanks on behalf of Stoughton Cares for participating in this forum. So we want to thank all of you for participating in this candidate forum as well on behalf of the members of Stoughton Cares and Cindy and myself. Kathy Kalina, who is also a member and a strong coordinator of this organization, could not be here tonight. There was a death in her family, so she had to be committed to that. So again, thank you again. Good luck in your candidacy. Good luck in the election. And we really are grateful that you gave up your time tonight to be with us. Thank you.
And thank you to everyone who came as well.
It's all about standing up in front of kids, shooting from the cup.